Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because stories like this deserve to be remembered. You've seen this man more times than you can count. His face lives somewhere in your memory, even if his name doesn't. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Hollywood legends, delivered lines that felt painfully real, and carried scenes without ever demanding attention. And then, one day, he was gone. No scandal, no headlines, no dramatic fall from grace, just silence. Richard Jaeckel's disappearance from Hollywood wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, almost invisible, just like the roles he spent his life perfecting. And that's what makes his story so unsettling. How does someone who worked nonstop for over 5 decades, who helped shape the realism of American cinema, end up forgotten by the very industry that depended on him? The answer isn't glamorous, it's human. And it's heartbreaking in ways most people never expected. Richard Jaeckel belonged to a rare group of actors whose presence felt familiar long before their names ever did. He was the soldier who looked like he'd actually been to war, the deputy who felt worn down by years on the job, the friend who added weight to a hero's journey without stealing the spotlight. From the 1940s through the 1990s, he appeared in war films, westerns, crime dramas, and television shows that defined American entertainment. Audiences trusted him instinctively. His eyes carried experience, exhaustion, and truth. He didn't charm the camera, he grounded it. Directors leaned on him when they needed authenticity, when a scene had to feel real instead of theatrical, yet Hollywood never elevated him. He became recognizable without becoming celebrated. People remembered the characters he played, but not the man behind them. Ironically, his greatest strength, his ability to disappear into a role, became the reason he was overlooked. He blended in too well. He felt too real. And in an industry obsessed with spectacle, that kind of honesty rarely gets rewarded. Throughout the golden age of Hollywood, the pattern stayed the same. Leading men got the magazine covers, the interviews, the legacy branding. Richard Jaeckel got the work. He was the dependable one. The man studios called when they needed credibility, not charisma. He wasn't there to dazzle audiences. He was there to make them believe. In films like The Dirty Dozen and sometimes A Great Notion, his performances carried emotional weight that lingered long after the credits rolled. Yet his name was often buried deep in the cast list. Posters rarely featured him. Trailers barely highlighted him. Even after earning an Academy Award nomination, studios continued treating him like background support rather than a talent worth spotlighting. While other actors hired publicists and carefully shaped their images, Jaeckel stayed quiet. He didn't chase fame. He didn't manufacture controversy. He believed the work should speak for itself. And in Hollywood, silence often comes at a cost. The tragedy is that audiences felt him deeply, even if they didn't know who he was. Unlike most actors, Richard Jaeckel didn't arrive in Hollywood with dreams of stardom. There were no drama schools, no theater background, no industry connections. In 1943, at just 17 years old, he was working as a mailboy at 20th Century Fox after his family relocated from New York to Los Angeles. The job paid only $18 a week, barely enough to get by, but it placed him right in the heart of the studio system during World War II, when Hollywood was expanding rapidly. Jaeckel wasn't trying to be noticed. He was simply delivering envelopes across massive studio lots, passing actors and executives without imagining he'd ever be one of them. Then one ordinary morning changed everything. While delivering mail to the casting department, he walked in at the exact moment filmmakers were searching for young men to play Marines. His look stopped them cold. He didn't look like an actor pretending to be a soldier. He looked real. Within minutes of that chance encounter, Richard Jaeckel was offered a screen test for Guadalcanal Diary. 3 days later, after a short audition, he was cast. For 6 weeks of filming, he earned $750, more money than he had made in nearly a year of running mail. His career had begun almost by accident, but instead of riding that momentum, he made a choice that would define the rest of his life. In 1944, at the height of his early success, he enlisted in the military. While war films were booming and young actors were building careers, Jaeckel chose real service over cinematic fame. He remained in the military until 1948. By the time he returned to Hollywood, the industry had moved on. Others had taken the spotlight, formed relationships, and secured leading roles. Jaeckel had to start over. But he returned with something far more valuable than connections, authentic experience. When he played soldiers, audiences believed him. He wasn't acting, he was remembering. That lived-in realism became Richard Jaeckel's trademark. Directors trusted him instinctively. When he appeared in films like Sands of Iwo Jima, his presence carried a weight no acting class could teach. He didn't perform bravery. He embodied it quietly. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, he became one of Hollywood's most reliable supporting actors, appearing in film after film without ever becoming a household name. He worked constantly, sometimes appearing in multiple projects a year. But with reliability came a trap. Studios began casting him in the same kinds of roles: soldiers, cowboys, blue-collar men hardened by life. He was so good at these characters that producers stopped imagining him as anything else. Even when he proved he could stretch beyond that mold, Hollywood refused to follow. His talent was undeniable. His versatility was clear. But the industry had already decided where he belonged. One of his most memorable moments came in The Gunfighter, where he played a young gunslinger opposite Gregory Peck. The role lasted only a single scene, but it left an impact. His death was quick, brutal, and unforgettable. It showcased everything he did best: truth, tension, and restraint. Yet instead of opening doors, it reinforced the image studios already had of him: rugged, tough, disposable. In 1952, he briefly broke that image in Come Back, Little Sheba, playing a confident, flirtatious young man. Critics praised him. The New York Times even singled him out. But Hollywood didn't change course. No matter how much range he showed, the roles stayed the same. He was essential but never central, valuable but never prioritized. And that pattern followed him for decades. In 1967, The Dirty Dozen became one of the defining war films of its era, and Richard Jaeckel delivered one of his strongest performances as Sergeant Clyde Boren. He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't dominate the screen, but he made the mission feel real. His calm delivery of death sentences sent chills through audiences. The film was a massive success and earned him a significant paycheck, yet it didn't change how Hollywood treated him. Even success didn't elevate him. His greatest artistic breakthrough came shortly after, when Paul Newman personally chose him for Sometimes a Great Notion. Newman saw something others had missed: vulnerability beneath the toughness. Jaeckel's performance earned him an Academy Award nomination. It should have transformed his career. It didn't. The phone didn't ring more. The roles didn't get bigger. He simply went back to work. As Hollywood evolved in the 1970s and 80s, Richard Jaeckel adapted without complaint. When films leaned toward spectacle and youth, he turned to television. Shows came and went: Firehouse, Frontier Circus, Salvage One, Baywatch. Most lasted only a season or two, but Jaeckel remained steady. Directors trusted him to anchor scenes, even in brief appearances. He brought history into every role, a sense that his characters existed long before the camera rolled. Off-screen, he lived modestly. He avoided Hollywood excess. He rushed home between shoots. He coached Little League. Fame never mattered to him. Stability did. Family did. Behind his consistent work ethic was deep personal pain. In 1948, his infant son nearly drowned in a swimming pool. The child was saved at the last moment, but the trauma stayed with Jaeckel forever. He became fiercely protective, deeply grounded, and emotionally reserved. Years later, his greatest heartbreak arrived. His wife, Antoinette, whom he had married in 1947, began showing signs of Alzheimer's disease. As his career slowed, her memory faded. The woman who had shared every struggle and success slowly disappeared from his life while still physically present. It was a loss without closure. And it happened as Hollywood itself began to forget him too. By the late 1980s, Hollywood no longer resembled the industry Richard Jaeckel had given his life to. The system that once relied on grounded performers was now chasing something else entirely. Studios began prioritizing spectacle over substance, faces that could sell posters rather than performances that could carry emotion. Explosions replaced conversations. Image replaced integrity. And quietly, without announcement, actors like Jaeckel were pushed to the margins. Casting rooms stopped calling. Directors who once depended on him were no longer making the kinds of films where he fit. It wasn't personal, but it was brutal. For the first time since he was 17 years old, work was no longer guaranteed. Each year brought fewer opportunities, smaller roles, shorter screen time. And because Richard had never built a public persona or celebrity brand, he had nothing to fall back on. Fame had never interested him, but now its absence came with consequences. Hollywood didn't fire him. It simply forgot him. And in an industry where momentum is everything, being forgotten is often worse than failing. Just as his career was slowing beyond recovery, Richard Jaeckel received the news that would end it entirely. In 1994, doctors diagnosed him with advanced melanoma. It wasn't caused by reckless behavior or addiction. It came from decades of surfing, long days under the California sun, living the kind of simple, physical life he loved. The disease moved quickly. Strength faded. Energy disappeared. Roles became impossible to accept. And as his health declined, the reality of Hollywood's financial structure became painfully clear. Despite appearing in more than 150 films and television episodes, Richard had never earned superstar money. Supporting actors didn't receive long-term security, residual wealth, or safety nets. Medical bills piled up. Treatments were expensive. Income had stopped. The numbers became overwhelming. What shocked people later wasn't just that he went broke, it was how fast it happened. A lifetime of steady work vanished in just a few years of illness. It exposed a hard truth about the industry. Loyalty flows one way, and when you can no longer work, you are often left to survive alone. In 1994, after more than 5 decades of uninterrupted employment, Richard Jaeckel filed for personal bankruptcy. The figure stunned those who knew him. Nearly $1.7 million in debt. For a man who had worked almost every year of his adult life, it felt unthinkable. His Brentwood home was taken. Furniture, personal belongings, and memorabilia collected across half a century were sold to cover expenses. These weren't luxury losses. They were the remnants of a life built carefully, modestly, honestly. There were no extravagant purchases to point to, no reckless spending habits, just medical costs, living expenses, and time catching up all at once. And perhaps the most painful part was the silence that followed. No studios reached out. No public campaigns emerged to help a veteran actor. No headlines acknowledged the collapse of a man who had helped define cinematic realism for generations. Hollywood, the place he had served faithfully, offered nothing but indifference. For Richard, the financial loss hurt, but the emotional realization that the industry no longer remembered him cut even deeper. As devastating as the financial collapse was, it wasn't the hardest battle Richard Jaeckel faced. That came at home. His wife Antoinette, the woman he had married in 1947, was deep into Alzheimer's disease by the early 1990s. The illness stripped away her memories slowly and cruelly. The life they had built together, the early struggles, the small victories, the long years of steady work, began to disappear from her mind. She no longer recognized the man she had spent nearly half a century beside. Richard visited her often, even when she looked at him like a stranger. Sometimes she smiled politely. Sometimes she didn't respond at all. For a man defined by loyalty and quiet strength, this was a grief beyond words. He was losing the only person who truly knew him, and he had no way to stop it. While Hollywood forgot his career, Alzheimer's erased his personal history. The timing was merciless. Just as his health failed and his finances collapsed, the one source of emotional stability he had left slipped away. This was not a dramatic tragedy. It was a slow, relentless heartbreak. After bankruptcy and declining health made independent living impossible, Richard Jaeckel moved into the Motion Picture and Television Fund home in Woodland Hills. It was a respected facility, created specifically to care for industry veterans who had fallen on hard times. Still, for Richard, it symbolized the end of something deeply personal. Since the age of 17, he had worked every single year. He had never relied on handouts, never stopped showing up. Now he needed help just to survive. His body weakened as melanoma spread. The man who once brought physical realism to every role struggled to walk without assistance. Yet even here, dignity remained. Gregory Peck quietly intervened to help secure his place. Staff treated him with respect, and unexpectedly, kindness came from outside the industry machine. Fans sent handwritten letters. Old co-stars contributed privately. No cameras, no publicity, just human decency. It was Hollywood helping him. It was people who remembered what he gave them. Remembered by the people. What happened next revealed a powerful contrast. While studios stayed silent, ordinary viewers didn't. Fans who had grown up watching his films reached out. They remembered his face, his voice, the feeling his performances gave them. Some sent small donations. Others sent stories about scenes they never forgot. Former co-stars, many of whom owed the realism of their films to his presence, helped quietly. This wasn't fame. This was gratitude. Richard never asked for recognition. But in his final years, he received something more meaningful than applause. He received acknowledgement from people who truly understood his value. Meanwhile, Antoinette remained alive but unreachable, locked behind the walls of Alzheimer's. Richard visited when he could. Sometimes she showed a flicker of recognition. Often she didn't. That loss stayed with him until the end. Cancer weakened his body, but watching the woman he loved forget him broke his spirit. Of all the battles he fought, this was the one he never recovered from. On June 14, 1997, Richard Jaeckel passed away at the age of 70. His death was noted briefly in trade papers, then quickly buried under newer headlines. There were no retrospectives, no award show tributes, no emotional montages celebrating his contribution to cinema. A man who appeared in more than 150 productions, worked across 5 decades, and earned an Academy Award nomination left the world almost unnoticed. For many, that silence feels cruel, but in a way it reflected the life he lived. He never chased attention. He never demanded recognition. He showed up, did the work, and moved on. Still, the absence of acknowledgement exposed a harsh truth about Hollywood. The industry celebrates stars, but it is built on people like Richard Jaeckel. And when they are gone, it rarely pauses to say thank you. Even without official tributes, Richard Jaeckel's work never truly disappeared. Late-night reruns introduced him to new generations. Film students began recognizing his face, then his name. Online discussions slowly revived appreciation for his performances. Directors who valued authenticity continued mentioning him with deep respect. His legacy lives not in awards, but in believability, in performances that never felt forced, in characters that felt like real people. He proved that acting isn't about being noticed, it's about being believed. In an industry obsessed with visibility, Richard Jaeckel mastered something rarer: truth. Hollywood history often focuses on stars, but cinema survives because of its foundations. Richard Jaeckel was one of those foundations. Without actors like him, stories collapse, heroes feel hollow, worlds feel fake. He carried scenes so others could shine. He added weight without stealing focus. And that kind of contribution doesn't fade easily. Even if his name isn't immediately remembered, the feeling he created remains. And that may be the most powerful legacy of all. So now the question is yours. When you think back, where do you remember Richard Jaeckel from? A war film? A Western? A scene that stayed with you longer than you expected? Share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us as we continue uncovering the untold stories of Hollywood's forgotten legends, the people who gave everything, even when the spotlight never came.